And all they do is ask questions. Questions. So people who ask questions all the time, it has to be a special skill to be able to patient enough to answer those questions. Well, people are always asking God questions. I know in my own life, I've got questions for God all the time. And there are certain questions that I seem to be asking him over and over and over again. And I don't mean it to be a complaint, although it probably sometimes comes across that way, that I'm complaining. But really, I think in my own little mind, I realize I'm dust, and my thoughts are not his thoughts, and my ways are not his ways. So he knows my frame. He knows I'm dust. He knows I'm dumb. But really in my heart, as I search my heart and have him search my heart, my questions are not to challenge him, to question his authority, or maybe even what he's doing. It's just really, I want to know the answers. I want to know what's going on that I don't understand. Now, I don't have any research. I can't stand here and make a claim with empirical evidence that I've done some research across the country and come up with answers. But I think from experience, both from my own life and also being in the position of a pastor for 40 years, people often come up, I don't know why, they come up and ask me why God's doing something. And of course, you know what my answer is? I don't know. I can give you Bible answers sometimes if it's pretty obvious, but people ask God questions. And usually, if I were to guess what the most popular question people ask God, it has something to do and starts with, why? Why did this happen? Why are you doing this? Why? Now, that's not an illegitimate question. It's, if you've ever been told by any preacher or teacher or parent that you should never ask why, that's just wrong. Sorry, if your parents told you that, then I'm here to tell you your parents missed that one. Because there's nothing wrong with asking why. I think that's why God teaches us with 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds that we need to understand there's nothing wrong with the question, because what do 2 and 3-year-olds do? Why? And it doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter what you say, because no matter what you say, the next answer is why? Why? So I say there's nothing wrong with asking God why, because Job asked why. You read Job lately? Jeremiah asked why. You read Jeremiah lately? Oh, let me give you a better one. Jesus asked why. Remember him on the cross? One of his questions started, why? Why have you forsaken me? So there's nothing technically wrong with asking why. The problem is when you begin to demand answers. And if the answer doesn't satisfy you, and then you get put out with God because you didn't get the answer that you expected. So I posed this question to some men in a Bible study this week. And I'll pose the same question to you. Now, they had time. They took some time and contemplated the question. And I won't have time for you to contemplate the question this morning. But I hope that you will turn it over in your mind this week and take some time to think about it. But here's the premise of my proposal. If you had a 30-minute interview exclusively with God, and by that I mean it's only you and God, okay? God's not going to, like God can be distracted, but God's not going to be distracted. He's, give me your full attention, God. You know, that kind of dumb idea. All right, God, I got your full attention. And God pulls up a chair and you pull up a chair and God says, you can ask me anything you want to ask and I'll answer it. What would you ask him? Now, we don't have time for you, and I don't expect you to come up with an immediate answer. Probably your question's going to start with why. And I wouldn't waste my time asking him, you know, those general worldwide questions like, why is there war? Now, the Bible tells you why there's war. Why is there not world peace? Well, the Bible tells you. Don't waste your time with those kind of questions. I mean, if you had 30 minutes with God and God's going to ask her any question you can answer, would you say, well, why did you allow sin to come into the world? Okay, the Bible tells you that. Just read, because I think the answer would be, Have you not read the scriptures? I'm not going to waste my time with that. I know what I'm going to ask, and it's the question that we find here in John chapter 11. Now, some people had the fortune of being alone with God and asking him questions. We call those people the disciples. Now, the disciples had 3.5 years with Jesus Christ, give or take a few months. They had 3.5 years with Jesus Christ, and I'm convinced we don't have every question they ask in the Bible. Because they're at campfires and they're walking and they're talking and they're spending time with him. And the Lord has chosen to pick out a few questions they ask and record them for us, but I don't think by any means, even John says at the end of this book, had I told you everything he did, there's not enough books in the world to contain what he did. But some of the questions they ask are interesting because it may be some of the questions you have questions too as well. And one of the questions they asked him one time was, what's the signs of your coming? How are we going to know you're coming back? You ever wondered that? Well, he gives you the answer. It's in Matthew 24 if you want to take time to read it after a while. Another question they asked that I thought was a very interesting question is one time they asked, where are you going and how do we get there? And he gave the answer in John chapter 14, if you want to read that in a little while. But basically the answer is, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. If you want to go to heaven, then you have to go by me. And if you choose some other way, it's too bad. But then there were times, I think also, that they ask, have you ever asked a question, as soon as you ask the question, you go, oh, man, I wish I could get that question back. Because that happened one time. James and John's mother walked up to him one time and said, hey, who's going to sit on the right hand and left hand of your kingdom? You think you could work that out? You think you could pull some strings and maybe get my sons on the right hand and the left? I imagine as soon as she asked that question, and the Lord gives the answer, by the way, I won't tell you what it is, you can look it up, but the Lord gives her an answer. But I just imagine just as soon as she asked that question and she got the answer, she felt about that small and wanted to walk away and go, well, I'm not doing that anymore. Not asking him any more questions like that. You know, I have this strange imagination. And I lay in bed at night sometimes and think about things. And I sit in my recliner and think about things. And as I was preparing this message, my imagination began to go. And I just had this imagination that when I get to heaven and everybody's there, you're there, I'm there, everybody's saved there. And God's having his great concourse of people that everybody who's ever been saved in all of history is standing there. And he said, hey, Vespi, come here. Come here. Yeah, you Vespi, come here. And so I walk up there and God puts his arm around me and looks at me and then looks at the congregation, millions and millions of people. And the good Lord says, hey folks, I want you to know, in all of history, in all time and space, Vespi here asked the dumbest question that's ever been asked. Wouldn't that be horrible? You know somebody has asked the dumbest question. The only thing maybe worse than that is for him to say, you know, Vespi here said the dumbest thing that's ever been said. You know somebody has. So that's my imagination going along. So I try to be careful about the questions I ask God. Questions are part of life. They're how we learn. And if you stop asking questions, then you're going to stop learning. And the Bible says in Proverbs chapter 1 that a wise man will hear and will increase learning. You never reach to the point in your life where you say, well, I'm done learning. You may be done with school, but you should never be done with learning. So one way to learn, an important way to learn, is to ask questions. And God encourages you to ask questions. In the book of James, he says, you have not because you ask not. You got a problem, you go to God. And you say, God, I've got this problem. I've got this thing that's got me stumped and I need an answer to it. Could you answer my question? I'm memorizing Psalm 147 right now. And Psalm 147 verse 5 says something great. He says, great is our Lord and of great power. Listen to this. And his understanding is infinite. Meditate on that. Do you think you can ask God a question that he doesn't have the answer to? He may not give you the answer. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there's no question you can ask him that he doesn't have the answer to. I heard of a parent, you parents pick up on this. I thought it was great. I wish I'd thought about it. So I do it with my grandkids now. This parent asked a child whenever they came home from school, did you ask a good question today? We typically ask, did you have a good day? And you ask any kid, did you have a good day? They're going to say, yeah, it was good. Fine. How was your day? Good. Fine. I about burnt the school down, but it was a good day. But if you ask them this question, did you ask a good question today? What question did you ask? It's a good way to learn how the school day went. So, asking questions. Let's ask some questions. Here's Mary and Martha in John chapter 11, and it's a critical time in their life. And there's a breeding ground within us, isn't there, to ask questions sometimes that penetrate our hearts so deeply that we have to ask God. There's situations that come up where we can't ask anyone else. Well, let's call the preacher. Well, he doesn't know. Let's call the psychologist. Well, he certainly doesn't know. Let's ask mom or dad. They don't know because nobody has the answers. The only one who has the answers is God. So this situation is a situation that calls for God. What's the situation? Well, let me catch you up in John 11. Lazarus is sick. He's not dead. He's sick. And the Lord gets word that he's sick. Now, he's very close to this family. Among the people on earth that he had when he was here, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus were among his best friends. In fact, you study the last week of Jesus Christ before he died. He spent 2 or 3 nights in their house overnight at their home. So these are people who are really close to Jesus Christ. And so he gets word. He's off on a trip. He gets word that Lazarus is sick. Now, what would you expect for your best friend to do? What would you expect your best friend who's raised the dead, who has healed the sick, who has cleansed the leper, who's given sight to the blind, who's given hearing to the deaf, what would you expect your best friend to do? Drop everything and run. But he didn't. He didn't. He waited. And he delayed. And it's inexplicable to Mary and Martha that they would do that he would do that. They are completely mystified. Why isn't Jesus here? Why hasn't he shown up? The Bible isn't tell us the incident of Lazarus, but again, with my imagination, I imagine Lazarus is laying there on his sick bed and his fever's going up and he's getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And anybody who comes in to take his temperature, his sister's doting over him, and his question is Jesus here yet? Well, no, Lazarus, but he's on his way. He'll be here. He'll be here. So Lazarus will drift off to sleep and then wake up in a worse fever, in a worse way, with a worse cough and a worse sickness. He's not getting any better. In fact, it's getting a little dangerous, and the sisters are getting more and more worried every day. And Lazarus asks every time, is Jesus here yet? No, he's not here yet, Lazarus. But he'll be here. And so with strained eyes and longing looks and their gaze as far off as they could see, with every sinew of their being, every nerve on edge, they are looking for any sign or any signal that Jesus indeed is going to come and rescue Lazarus, his best friend, from this sickness, from this problem they face, and they are helpless to stop it themselves. They can't do anything. There's no medicine they can give him. There's no care they can give him. They can't call the nurse. They can't call the doctor. The situation is terminal. The situation is hopeless. And the creep of death has begun its journey across Lazarus' brow and body. And there's nothing they could do unless Jesus shows up on time. If he'll just show up, then everything will be fine. Of course, I have to couch and say very quickly, because we say it, if Jesus will just show up on time, and my question has to be, according to whose timeline? What is on time for you? What's on time for Mary and Lazarus and Martha? Well, on time for them is, get me out of this mess as soon as possible. Cure me of this sickness ASAP, right? That's our desire. That's our time. But now, of course, we know that God has a different time because Jesus does show up. He does. And when he shows up, it says in verse 20, then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him, but Mary was sat still in the house. So we'll learn about Mary in a minute, but Mary's in the house. And Martha, as soon as she hears Jesus is coming, she takes off like a 100-meter race. And she goes out to meet Jesus Christ. And she does not ask something I would expect. She does not ask, why didn't you come? Because he did come. He's there. Why didn't you come? I'm here. The problem wasn't that Jesus Christ didn't come. The problem was with the timing. That's always the problem when it comes to us and God. Because we expect to say, God, jump, and him go. Is that what you said for me to do? Right? Because sometimes we think God is our servant boy. We think God is our paid hand. We put offering in the offering plate and we make a deposit and we're making an investment and we're sort of gambling like we're in Vegas and saying, okay, God, I put money in the plate last week. Doesn't that get me some extra prayer time? So maybe a few answers. Have you kept up with my ledger, how much I kept? Could you see the treasure and just keep up with how much I've given? And expect God to do something because we've done something. But that's not how God works. Many people, perhaps you, certainly me, has a problem with God's timing at times. We're not patient. We don't want to wait. To use the vernacular that we'll all understand, we don't want to be left hanging. We want God to move. We say, God, I got a problem. God, we've got a problem. And the Lord said, no, we don't have a problem. You may have a problem. I don't have a problem because I'm the problem solver. Okay, God, solve my problem. Now, you may not recognize this at first. That's why God called me to be your preacher, to show you things that maybe you might miss in the scriptures, and he shows me, and then I have the privilege of showing you. One time, I was in an event, and a fellow said to me, have you ever noticed the FedEx trucks? And I said, well, of course, I see them all the time. He said, you ever seen the arrow in the FedEx truck? I went, no, I've never seen the arrow in the FedEx truck. Have you ever seen the arrow in the FedEx truck? Have you? Once you see it, you can't unsee it. But if you've never seen it, you'll go, no, where is that arrow? You say, preacher, there's an arrow in the FedEx. Yeah, in FedEx, there's an arrow. Now, don't wreck looking for it, but it's there. So here we have a scripture verse, and there's something here that you may not initially see. It's something subtle, and what it is an accusation of Jesus by Mary and also by Martha. They don't directly blame him. They would never do that. But they sure hint that Jesus has let them down, don't they? Notice their wording again. Verse 21 and verse 21 and verse 32 are the same, at least in the statement they make. Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. It was really God's fault Lazarus died. Because he could have stopped it. Does everybody agree with that? He could have stopped it. And he didn't. You see, there is planted within our heart, just from the beginning, from our first father, Adam, there's planted a seed inside the soil of your heart, and it's just there, and it's dormant, but it's ready to grow. All you got to do is water it a little bit. And if you water that seed, it's going to spring up, and it's going to bring forth a poison fruit. And let me tell you what that is. It is accusing God for your problems. Adam did that. Excuse me just a minute, ladies. But Adam did that. Because when God comes walking in the cool of the day to find Adam, he says, did you eat of the fruit that I told you not to eat of? And he said, well, it's the woman that you gave me. See, I was good. I was fine. Everything was perfect. I was happy with the skunks. I was happy with the giraffes. Everything was good. Everything was under my dominion. And then you decided that I needed help. It's her fault. Isn't that what he said? Am I lying? That's what he said. The woman whom thou gavest me. And some of you guys think that your whole problems would be solved if it just wasn't for her. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have got a ticket. If it hadn't been for her, I'd have a lot more money. If it wasn't for her, yeah. But see, I know, even though it's in the Bible, because the woman doesn't blame the man, it's just this, pass it along, transference. So she blames the serpent. And she says it's the serpent's fault. But since all you've got is a husband, the next best thing to a snake, what you do is you blame the husband and you say to God, if you hadn't given me this genius as a husband, I would be a lot better off. And it's really your fault that I ever met him. And I said I do. That's the way we think. It's a blame game. And the blame game isn't really, it's just, that's a facade. You don't really have the courage to say what you want to say. Mary and Martha don't have the courage to say what they want to say. Adam didn't really have the courage to say what he wanted to say. He blamed the woman, but really, underneath here, they're blaming God. And you do too. You blame God. You say, God, it's your fault this has happened. God, you really messed up this time. Your timing is a little off. I know everybody deserves an off day. And I know, God, sometimes you don't bat 1,000. Oh, wait, he always bats 1,000. But the way we think like Mary and Martha, and we think, well, God's losing it a little bit. He's a little older now. Maybe he's having a little memory problems. Now, the same question that Mary and Martha ask of Jesus, Mary and Joseph ask of Jesus. Oh, let me catch up on that story. So Jesus and his family, Mary and Joseph, are in Jerusalem for the feast, and they leave. And Jesus is 12 years old. And when they leave, I don't get this part of the story, they lose him for 3 days. If DHS was around in those days, it would have been bad. They lose him for 3 days, and they look around finally. Who woke him up? Where's Jesus? Oh, I thought he was with you. Oh, I thought he was with you. I thought he was playing with John the Baptist, and they can't find him. And so they rush back to Jerusalem. They find him in the temple, and he's talking to the brains, He's talking to the PhDs. He's talking to the smart guys. And he's sitting there, and he's answering their questions and asking them questions they can't answer. But do you remember what Mary and Joseph said to him? Same thing here. Where have you been? Where have you been? Oh, that's the question. See, that's the question. That's the question I leave you with. God, I'm sick. Where have you been? God, I'm lonely. Where have you been? God, I'm in trouble. Where have you been? God, I'm hurting. Where have you been? My child is wayward. Where have you been? My child has a fever. Where have you been? My loved ones are lost. Where have you been? I'm losing my job. Where have you been? I'm losing my mind. Where have you been? I'm losing my health. Where have you been, God? Have you been too busy for me? Sometimes when we ask Where have you been? The answer is he's been there the whole time. There's an old song from the 70s, 80s. Maybe some of you remember. It's a Gaither song. Maybe you can look it up. I listened to it last night because I hadn't heard it in years, but it came to mind as I was preparing the message. And the song goes, he's been there all the time, waiting patiently in line. He's been there all the time. He never left. So when we start to wander off and go our own way like sheep do, we tend to go astray. He's there and he's putting up all kinds of warning signs. And he's putting all kinds of obstacles up, and he puts hurdles in your way to try to keep you from going. But we are headstrong, and we got a tailwind. We're gonna go headlong and spiral out of control, and we're gonna head down that path no matter who tries to stop us and who tries to warn us. Doesn't matter what God says, we're gonna go down that path, and what happens? We end up shipwrecked. And then we look around and want to blame the captain. We want to treat God like he's Captain Smith on the Titanic. But it doesn't work that way. Let me give you an example, personal example. Lord, I've got liver disease and I've got kidney disease. Man, I'm in a mess. I got a problem. Where were you with all this happening? Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. I was back there in 1990 with a good doctor. I think that doctor told you that you needed to lose 20 pounds. Did he? Am I remembering right? Oh, yeah, God. I think he did say that. Yeah, and you went back the next year and you saw the same doctor, and didn't he say your liver enzymes are up and you need to lose 20 pounds? Yeah, God. Well, see, I was there the whole time trying to tell you through your doctor that you needed to lose 20 pounds. Did you lose 20 pounds? Well, no, Lord, actually, I put on 20. I got a little confused with the scale. And so what happened? Well, Lord, you know what happened. So the Lord then says about 20 years later, 30 years later, he says, congratulations, you got a new liver and new kidney. And you know this, that might not have happened had you listened to me 20 or 25 years ago. Where are you, Lord? Oh, I was back there telling you to quit doing what you're doing. Did you listen? Well, Lord, I didn't know that was you. That was my medical doctor. Do you think I can speak to you through your medical doctor or through your wife or through your husband or through your preacher? Do you think I've got plenty of ways to talk to you? And did you listen? Well, in my example, I didn't listen. Would you learn from me? Would you learn from me? I never drank a drop, and I got cirrhosis of the liver. You say, why? Too many Big Macs. Too many Big Macs. That's why I named my kidney Big Mac. You know, it's a tradition when you get a new kidney, you name it. And so they said, you got to name your kidney. And I said, well, I don't know what to name it. This is pressure. This kidney's going to have this name for eternity. What do you want to name your kidney? And so I decided I was going to name my kidney Big Mac, just to remind me that God tried to talk to me a long time ago, and I didn't listen. There are really sometimes easy explanations, and we understand the answer. We just don't want the answer. Here's Mary and Martha. Lazarus, they're facing trouble. And I'm not even saying they're out of the will of God. I'm not saying they did like I did. I'm not saying they ignored God's will. I do know that the scripture is clear that this sickness was for the glory of God. That's a lot harder. That's a lot more difficult than logically putting the pieces together and saying, I got this sickness because I did this. That's a lot easier. Then, I got this sickness, and I don't have any idea why. I don't know what. Well, you didn't do anything wrong. You couldn't have done any better. But God wanted you sick. Now, you're not going to hear that every church you go to, and you're not going to hear every preacher tell you that. But sometimes people get sick for the glory of God. You say, where's that in the Bible? John 11. God says clearly, this is for the glory of God. And sometimes we pray and he waits. And why doesn't he deliver us from tribulation and trials? And it may not be, brethren, this is not the best news I can give you, but it may not be that you won't understand until after the resurrection. Because Lazarus is sick and he's pining away and it's getting worse and worse and worse. Is Jesus coming? He'll be here. Is Jesus coming? He's on his way. And then he dies. And Lazarus doesn't understand why he died till the resurrection. Oh, it's for the glory of God. I know that's not easy. But I'm here to tell you that what you're going through right now, you may not understand until after the resurrection. I don't like that. Do you like that? I don't like that. Because I don't like to wait. I want to know now. Why am I going? It'll be easier for me to go through this now if I just know why. And God says it's not for you to know the why. It's for you to trust me. Because this is the time of faith. And faith pleases me. So would you just trust me? Night before last, I'm going to my brother's house. He's got 2 dogs. I've got little Harper with me. She's 6 years old. And she's in the back seat. And she's going, oh, Grandpa, I'm afraid of these dogs. I'm afraid of these dogs. And she's just having a nervous time. The dogs are going to lick me. The dogs are going to bite me. The dogs are going to jump on me. And I said, Harper, there's nothing to be afraid of. These dogs are not going to bother you. I promise you nothing's going to happen. Your Uncle Ken will not let these dogs bother you. They'll be on a leash. They will not bother you. I want to stay in the car. Can I just stay in the car? Well, it's 12 below zero. No, I'm sorry. You can't stay in the car. I don't want to go in, but you have to go in. So just trust me. So we go in and the dogs are fine and she's fine. In a little while she's petting the dogs. So I said, Harper, come here. She comes and stands before me and I said, we've got a life lesson here I want to teach you. Lesson number 1, sometimes you're afraid of things that you don't need to be afraid of. And number 2, if I tell you something that I'm going to take care of you, you can count on the fact that I'm going to take care of you. Now, after I had that conversation with her, I laid down at bed and feeling like a 6-year-old, the Lord comes to me and says, hey, Vespi, there's some things you're afraid of that you don't need to be afraid of. And if I tell you something, you can count on it. Amen. Yes, sir, Lord. Out of the mouth of the babes and sucklings, thou hast perfected strength. I can't tell you, folks, you're going to understand. I wish I could. I wish I had the answers. But we still ask, and mostly because of our sin, and mostly because of our lack of faith. We have faith sometimes like the little minions, but then we see this, and I'll close with this idea. Then we see what God does. So here they are. God, where have you been? Why haven't you shown up? Mary asked that. Martha asked that. I'm sure Lazarus would have if he could have. But even Joseph and Mary asked that. Where have you been? But then, do you remember back at the Garden of Eden? That wasn't the first time the question was asked. God comes along, walking in the cool of the day, and there is Adam and Eve, and they've eaten the fruit that they're not supposed to eat of, right? Do you happen to remember what God asked them? Where are you? Put another way, Adam, where have you been? Oh, maybe it isn't so much, brethren, that we need to ask God where he's been. Maybe God needs to ask you, where have you been? He's not moved. He's there. He's faithful all the time. He's good all the time. He's true all the time. He'll show up right on time. I want to ask this. If I had to ask this one question, I'm looking for the second coming of Jesus Christ. I looked all of 2023. It still may happen. But sometimes this question creeps up because I water the poison plant and it comes up and I want to go to the Lord before he comes back and goes, where have you been? You promised you were coming back. Where have you been? And his answer comes through clear and true through this story. He'll be here right on time.